Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening and welcome to Fate Mag Radio. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and I just have to apologize for this late start. We have had some bodacious storms come through here, and it has just been a heyday. I don't know if my mic was struck with lightning or what, but all of a sudden it was disabled, which is always fun when you're trying to host a radio show. No biggies, we got it. But I do want to go ahead and let you know that we have been watching all the turmoil and the aggravation and everything that's going on, in addition to the fear and the anxiety, the suffering of loss, the fear of loss. And for myself, I just want to say, just take care of you the best way that you can, because it matters what happens with you. And prayers for your loved ones. I have a friend who is ill right now and is having to stay at home because there are no tests available in the Chicagoland area, apparently. So I just wanted to say, hi, Mary, I'm thinking about you, and I hope that you're having a better day today. and they keep getting better. Now, we are going to move on to the crux of the matter here, which is why you're listening tonight. Our guest is Arlen Schumer, who is probably one of the best cartoon artists I've ever had the chance to review the work of. He is something else. He is an award-winning comic book style illustrator for the advertising and editorial markets. He is an author, designer of coffee table art books, including Visions from the Twilight Zone and The Silver Age of Comic Book Art. And that one won the Independent Book Publishers Award for Best Popular Culture Book. He is a member of the Society of Illustrators. I can only imagine the talent there. And what I think is very cool, and why I think he is just a perfect mesh for Fate Mag Radio, is that he is considered and recognized as an expert on American pop culture, especially the legendary television series The Twilight Zone, right? Fate Mag, The Twilight Zone, complete and total blend. Complete and total blend. And also on the music of Bruce Springsteen, which means he's probably about my age. And
respect your elders.
Absolutely. I'm going to tell you that the coolest thing, and you can find these on his YouTube page, are his visual lectures. And it's not just on this. I think that the 50 Years of Batman, the Neil Abrams 50 Years of Batman lecture was my favorite because I am a Batman fiend. And, I mean, who could get away with that, right? Running around in tights with a mask on and, you know, that's almost as good a disguise as Superman sunglasses or regular glasses. But also, you know, there is a visual lecture on Jack Kirby. And if you don't know who he is, you have got to go and check that out. You will be educated. You will be beyond, it'll just blow your mind. He is genius. And I think, do you mind if I quote you?
Go ahead.
Well, in this, he's talking about different creators of things. And he talks about creating gods and doing this, that, and the other. And one thing that you said about Jack Kirby was he created universes of imagination beyond our understanding. And I think that is the best compliment that you can give to somebody who is dealing with fiction and fantasy.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. And again, thank you so much for being here, because I'm going to tell you, you have the patience of a saint. And I appreciate it. If you knew how many times I was bringing it up and taking it down and bringing it up and taking it down, and I couldn't figure out why my mic was disabled. So I grabbed an old Yeti out of a drawer. I had my Sennheiser. I was going to hook my mixer up, and I was missing a cable, and I didn't have time to find it. So I was flying low through everything, and ta-da! 30 minutes late, but we're here. And thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I was really excited. We got introduced by Mark Addy,
yes,
who had interviewed you previously. And he was just so into that interview. I see why. When I started doing the research and the reading, you're something else. Why don't you tell people a little bit about, because they haven't had your bio to read and your things to look at. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what actually brought you into this as your career and why you focused on these topics? Because it's rather unusual. I am fascinated by it. I mean, you hit Comic-Cons all over the place. People love your work.
Thank you, Kat. So where do I begin? I'm a child of American pop culture. The very first image I can recall seeing as a child was the Twilight Zone eyeball in outer space from the 1963 opening. I was about 4.5 years old. And that's my first visual image. My very first movie image was my mother, may she rest in peace, took my brother and I to see the first Sean Connery James Bond movie, Dr. No, in a drive-in theater in 1963, also when I was 5 years old. And I didn't have a father. My father died when I was 4 months old, so my mother raised my brother and I herself. So I think I ended up finding my surrogate father figures in the American pop culture that I was ingesting. So whether it was Connery, whether it was Rod Serling, whether it was the superheroes, Superman and Batman, eventually Bruce Springsteen, these men all taught me the things that I can only assume a traditional father teaches a son. Things like the difference between right and wrong, when to stand up for your beliefs, when to fight, and also just about love, the nature of love. Somebody handed me a quote many years ago and said, Arlen, this quote is you. And it was from the existentialist writer Albert Camus. And I can recite it from memory. And it went, a man's work is nothing but the slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened. And Kat, when I read that, I was like, you're right, that is me, because that's what I've been doing my whole career, is taking the art and the artists and the things that I loved as a kid growing up in the 60s and recontextualizing them as works of art, graphic design, illustration, you name it, my lectures. Everything is a way of feeding back to people the things I loved, and yet with the knowledge and the adult understanding, going to a great art school, learning, reading, studying, knowing the history, and being a practitioner myself, I'm able to take these things that I love, like, let's say, The Twilight Zone, and reconfigure it as a coffee table art book or as a lecture or you name it. If you go to my website and you go to the Twilight Zone icon and pull down that menu, you'll see a bunch of projects I've done on the Twilight Zone that are all different types of things, but they're all basically art that I've made out of the American pop culture that influenced me. In a way, Kat, that kind of makes me like a pop artist, because pop art was all about taking art from the environment versus landscapes or the natural world and reconfiguring it as new paintings, as new works of art. And that's kind of what I've done with the things that I've loved.
You've done it well. You know, it's really, I have been to all kinds of exhibits of all kinds of pop art from, well, everywhere. The New York Met, the Bellagio, the places in Palm Springs. I mean, places that have unusual and unexpected art. Whether it's the soup cans or the Muhammad Ali beautiful pieces. When I walked around the corner and I saw Starry Night, the original Starry Night, I cried. I could see where, because I was seeing it live. There's just something about that. But I think that your art could create that in somebody like yourself who didn't have a male role model and needed one and was trying to find one. I think that, like you, you're actually giving them a way to see the austerity, but the compassion and the right from wrong of all of these characters. And then, you know, Rod Serling's little quirky personality, because you've got to have that side too, as well as the absolute imagination that went into every episode.
Right.
I think you bring that.
I try.
You do.
It's funny you say that, because I consider myself the son Rod Serling never had, because he did have two daughters that are a couple years older than me, excuse me, but I basically could have been his son age-wise. But what I'd like to think is I've done what a son would do to honor his father's legendary work. In terms of the Twilight Zone works that I've done, I'd like to think are what a son would do to honor Serling's legacy. And yet I've done that with all my work. My book, The Silver Age of Comic Art, is treating the comics that I grew up with with love and with passion. My lectures, you mentioned pop art before. My upcoming webinar on Wednesday on the relationship between art and comic book art basically begins with pop art and how comic books were a part of pop art right from the very beginning. The very first image that's considered a pop art painting, and it's not even a painting, it's a collage by the English artist, not even an American artist, Richard Hamilton. But he made a collage out of images from American magazines and comics. So there's a comic book image by the artist you mentioned before, Jack Kirby, in the very first image that is considered in 1956, the very first image of pop art. So comics and pop art were connected right from the beginning, and that's where I begin my webinar, and I take people through a kind of an artistic journey showing the relationships, like a compare contrast of comic book images with classic images from the fine art world.
Isn't that cool? I think that's
the coolest.
I think it is too.
And yet it's also considered, in fine art circles and academic worlds, it's still considered fairly blasphemous what I'm doing. If you've seen my promo image comparing Michelangelo's David to a drawing of Superman by the great artist Neil Adams, who was one of my father figures that I ended up working for, one of my childhood idols, one of the gods of comic book art. I mean, imagine if you had told me when I was 12 years old, Arlen, one day you'll be working for Neil Adams, I would have had a 12-year-old adolescent heart attack right there. But I'm lucky and blessed enough that I was able to work for him. But, he made a drawing of Superman that I consider the single greatest drawing of Superman ever. And in my webinar, I compare, it's the logo image of the webinar, art and comic book art, where I show Michelangelo's David right next to Neil Adams' Superman. Now, in the academic fine art world, that's practically blasphemous to even put those two images next to each other. But you see, I take the attitude, and I went to art school. I went to all the art history lectures. I'm not as learned about fine art history as I am about comic book history, but I'm certainly aware of the prejudice and the looking down upon that the fine art world has always had towards comics. It's obviously changed in the last, basically in this century. I mean, even illustrators like Norman Rockwell were looked down upon by the fine art world. Only until this century was Rockwell kind of taken in, given a show at the Guggenheim in the early 2000s, and considered a great American artist. The fantasy painter Frank Frazetta used to also just be considered just an illustrator. And now he's accepted in galleries and museums around the world. But when we were kids, we knew these guys were great artists. We didn't distinguish between a great paperback cover painter like Frazetta or an illustrator like Rockwell with any of the great fine artists. In fact, we thought the comic artists were better. But my point is, I take the position of what I call the aliens. If they came to Earth and they saw an image of, for instance, Michelangelo's Pietà with an image by Jack Kirby of Odin holding a seemingly dead Thor, his own son, in his arms, cradled like the Pietà, I believe aliens, unburdened by 500 years of art history, telling them that one is bad and one is good, I think they'd look at those two images and say, oh, two Earth parents cradling their dead children. And they wouldn't say one is better than the other. And I'm not saying comics are better than fine art, certainly. But I'm not saying that fine art is better than comic art. I'm saying they're both great and they both share. And that's what, the term compare and contrast. I'm both comparing them and I'm contrasting them. In my webinar, if you come Wednesday night, you'll see the way I do it is just to show more what they have in common, not what makes them different.
Well, I think they both have their place. I do think that they have great commonality, which would probably send my friend Damon to the ground in a swoon. But I didn't realize it was that long before Rockwell was granted that showing at the Guggenheim. But we have to take a really fast break. So we will be right back. And thank y'all so much for being with us and for hanging in there. The storms appear to have passed. I haven't heard lightning in a little while. And my husband hasn't run in here to tell me to get under a desk. So I think we're good. We'll be right back. Thanks for your patience.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming. To the skeptic, there will never be enough. Hello, everyone. Join Kevin and Jennifer Malik, the host of Paraversal Universe, every Friday here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET-FM and The Rift. Log on or tune in as they check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, cryptids and monsters, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, metaphysics, and forbidden archaeology. Listen as Kevin and Jennifer interview the top minds in their respective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries. For future show and archive information, one can find Paraversal Universe on Facebook, Twitter, and MeWe under various Paraversal Universe headings. So, for excellent talk radio about the unknown and unexplained, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society, Ltd., and produced by WBHM-DB.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I'm so glad you're with us because I know you're enjoying this already as much as I am. My guest is Arlen Schumer. He is a brilliant comic book style artist, and his lectures are terrific. His websites and his YouTube page and everything are going to be posted in the show release when we get done. I'll put it up there with that so that you can go and just listen to him because he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so,
Kat, where have you been in my life with all these compliments? My head is too fit in the webcam.
I call him as I see him, man. That's what I do.
Yeah, any more at home like you? You got a sister or something? Come on.
Oh, you don't want that one.
Hey,
I'm just going to put
no idea how desperate I am.
So there's that.
Brought her past me.
You think you escaped the first time. But at any rate, we were talking, I kind of interrupted you a little bit. But, yeah, we were talking about traditional, air quotes, traditional classical art. Do you know that, I don't know if it was Facebook or if it was Spreaker. I mean, not Spreaker. Who I do my video. Oh, the video thing. I think it was actually Facebook that put a little black box over David's penis. And I was like, this is classic art. What are you doing? This is crazy. So at any rate, I thought you would appreciate that.
Well, I think what you're talking about is the logo image to my forthcoming webinar Wednesday night, Art and Comic Art. And on the 22nd at 8 p.m. EST, because the head of New York Adventure Club, which is the organization I'm doing these webinars with, he felt that we need to put that little sort of black bar over David's private parts because, everybody's a little afraid these days and a little skittish of people and their reactions to things like that. And, you have to pick your fights. I didn't want to get into a fight. So I suggested, listen, rather than putting an actual fig leaf over it, which is what he was going to do, I said, why not actually put the New York Adventure Club logo, which is what he did. So, it's a little pun. If you got to cover him up with something, make it a little pun. But, in the show itself, we don't, censor anything, that I would not have gone along with. But like I said, you have to pick your battles, and there are certain things that are just not worth fighting over. And believe me, in my career, I've had my share of battles and, burn bridges behind me and things like that. So hopefully you get older, you live and learn, and, you got to go along to get along.
Well, Sherry in chat is interested in knowing if you're a fan of Andy Warhol's art.
Andy Warhol, you mean the greatest artist of the second half of the 20th century?
Something
Picasso
like that.
being the greatest artist of the first half of the 20th century? Listen, in my webinar on art and comic art, Warhol was right there at the very beginning, obviously, of the pop art field. And he was doing comic book style paintings taken from comic book and cartoon source material in 1961. And then I think a dealer friend brought him over to this young artist, Roy Lichtenstein, and showed Warhol what Lichtenstein was doing, which was taking also images from actual comic book cartoons and painting them. And when Warhol saw what Lichtenstein was doing, that's when Warhol stopped doing those things and let Lichtenstein have that feel. And that's when Warhol went off and started doing his Coke bottles and Brillo boxes and other things. But in my webinar, I show his very early fine art works after he was, a well-known illustrator in New York City for years. His first fine art works were giant paintings of Mickey Mouse, and he did one of the Batman comic book logo. He did a Superman painting from a comic book panel. And these all predate what Lichtenstein was doing, or at about the same time. So, yeah, Warhol is a big part of pop art. And I've never been a super fan, pun intended, of Warhol, but I totally respect him for what he did and the ground that he broke in so many different areas. And he is, if not the greatest artist of the second half of the 20th century, certainly the most influential. Even in, films, his films have proven to be, they were ridiculed when he was doing them, but they've proven to be impactful and influential as much as his silk screens and his other art. And of course, he predicted celebrity culture with his famous phrase about everybody in the future will be famous for 15 seconds or 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my 15 seconds. Forget about 15 minutes.
I got mine recently. I got to be on a television show, and that was my, 15 seconds of fame. It was fun.
I've been on TV. I've had some TV appearances and things, interviews and things like that.
Well, I was just a witness to something, so that was kind of fun. But have you been to she wants to know if you've been to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and she says, if not, you need to go. It's incredible.
No, I would like to go if I find myself in Pittsburgh, definitely. I've known about it. I've seen all of his shows, in the New York area, absolutely. But no, I've never been to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, but one day, hopefully.
Well, I have seen exhibitions of his in 2 different locations with different pieces, and it was kind of cool. I'd already been someone who enjoyed his work, but to actually have it in front of me, and I was like, well, I wonder if that's glued together, because what if somebody who is clumsy comes through, right? And because I am that clumsy person, I fall down, go boom a lot, but I didn't there. But
yeah.
I just love people that think outside the box, and you do. He did. There's so many different ways to express your creativity. I would love to be able to do what you do. I cannot, without a lot of time and effort, draw anything. Like weeks.
That's an old saw that I've heard. Every artist has heard his whole life. And, you probably, number one, draw better than you think you do, but it's just because you don't exercise that particular muscle. Non-artists don't realize that art, whether it's writing, painting, drawing, you name it, any art, it's just like athletics. We know a lot about athletics because there are sports shows on TV. There are talk shows about sports. We've seen films. We know about the training that athletes go through to get to the Olympics. They train every day for 4 years to get there. People don't realize that art is just like athletics. The more you do it, the better you'll be at it. You can go to art school. You'll learn some things. But if you really want to be an artist, it's all in the process. It's in the doing. If you write a little bit every day, guess what? You'll be a better writer. If you draw a little bit every day, you will draw better. But people have been sold a bill of goods by society that art is somehow, this word talent, whatever that means, is like pixie dust that gets sprinkled on us, and we're magic, and laymen don't have that pixie dust, so they can't draw a straight line, as they love to say. But to most artists, they'll tell you art is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of lonely work. In this whole, every art is essentially you and the drawing board, the computer, the tablet, the typewriter, whatever it is, and you have to just do it. But like I said, is that any different from the dancer, the ballet dancer that is practicing every day in a ballet studio somewhere, or an athlete running or jumping or pole vault, you name it? But people think they don't associate art with athletics. They think art, like I said, is some magic process. Our society discourages as many people from becoming artists as it encourages. And a lot of it is, parents, they're fearful that their kids won't make a living. So we unfortunately suppress a lot of our artists in society. Luckily, maybe by twist of fate, maybe had my father lived, he would have been the more traditional father, pushing me into a profession away from what I originally loved as a kid. But my mother, may she rest in peace, was good-natured and easygoing. And all she cared about was as long as I was happy. But I knew I was going to be an artist when I was 3 years old. I never went through that identity crisis later on in life that I'm going through crises now. But back, when I was a teenager, I didn't go through those. What am I going to be I just always knew I was going to be an artist. I didn't know what exactly kind of an artist. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just so taken aback when you said that, because when you are meant to be something, I think you do know it young. My cousin at 7 knew that he was going to be a surgeon. No doubt. Never any doubt. Never any deviation. Always knew that, which was weird because a friend of mine was a med school student and he took him to meet his cadaver at 7. I would not go. I thought it was freaky. But anyway, I had no interest in meeting him. That just blew my mind. And now I'm a paranormal investigator. So, I guess I'm better with them after. But what is your favorite project that you've ever worked on? Do you have one specifically?
Wow, my favorite. That's like asking a parent to pick their favorite children. It's like we're supposed to say we love them all. But, speaking of children, it's almost as if I have 3 metaphorical artistic children. Comic books, comic book history, that whole world is one. The Twilight Zone and the whole world of the Twilight Zone is another. And then the life and music of Bruce Springsteen is a third. And in each of these categories, I've created works of art or graphic design or presentation or you name it about those 3 subjects that are works that nobody else has ever done. I mean, plenty of fans of Bruce Springsteen, but nobody's done the things about Bruce Springsteen that I've done in terms of treating his work the way I've treated it and discussing him the way I've discussed him. And that goes for the Twilight Zone as well. Plenty of Twilight Zone fans, but nobody's done the works of art about the Twilight Zone that I've done. And I'd like to think the same thing goes with comics. My book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, that people listening in can buy, through my website and directly from me. There's never been a book about comic book art that's been about the artwork with the text being supplementary. Most history books about comics have been text heavy with miniature reproductions. Now, here I am, an artist who became an artist because of the great art in comics. And I have all the history books about comics that were like that. And I was like, where is the book about the art in comics? Exactly. Well, you know what they say, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Well, it only took me about 25 years, Kat, but I did it. And I'd like to think my book, The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, is the greatest book about comic book history. And I'm only saying that because I have every book about comic book art history. It's certainly the only book that treats the art as art, meaning big, beautiful color reproductions. And then the text is mostly the artist talking about the art. I'm just like a curator, but I actually take out the original text and a lot of the word balloons in the art, and I put the artist talking about the art. So you read my book like a giant comic book, but it's also an art book and it's also a history book, because the Silver Age is the 1960s basically. And the timeline running throughout the book is about how the art reflected what was happening in the decade. So that's the kind of edutainment aspect, that you'll learn something, you'll learn what the artist felt about the art, but you'll also see the great comic book art that influenced me and an entire generation. I'm certainly not the only one. Most of the people working in comics right now were influenced by the art and artists that are in my Silver Age book.
That's cool. So
all the movies that are being made are all about characters created 50 and 60 years ago in the beginning of the Silver Age. Comics have always been ahead.
I'm a Marvel girl. I love Captain America. I love Thor. I just like those movies because they're Thor and his brother, they're gods, but they have human frailties, personality wise. And I just think that to be able to accept and include that side of a character, especially back in the 60s into the 70s. I mean, it's just so, it was daring, I think.
Absolutely.
To admit that a god could have weakness. So,
although, again, all the mythic stories of the gods have always been, especially the Norse gods and the Roman and Greek gods, they were always screwing around, pun intended, with humans and causing havoc and things like that. So Jack Kirby, who created Thor, that you mentioned before,
yes,
he learned about the Norse god legends from his European immigrant parents, and he basically recycled them through a comic book superhero lens. Thor was originally created with those same primary colors of red, yellow, and blue to be like Marvel's Superman. But it was only as Kirby got going with Thor that he started to incorporate the Asgardian legends from the Norse myths and bring them into comics. And basically, he took Thor off of the earth and brought him up into Asgard. And that's where his real greatest adventures, took place.
I think that's one of my favorite things too. I love fantasy that you can follow and that doesn't get so far out that you lose touch with it, I guess is a good way to put it. But
well, yeah, you look at the successful fantasies of today's pop culture, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Star Wars. It's all about taking these fantasies and making them look or read, in a sense, realistically. The reason why guys like Neil Adams were so brilliant with his almost photorealistic drawing style was when you take a fantasy world and you make it look real, people are going to love that because they want their fantasies to look and feel and be real. Star Wars succeeded because it felt real.
Yeah.
And that was George Lucas's love of comics and, Lord of the Rings and all that stuff, and just, siphon through his imagination and science fiction. But, Twilight Zone was Serling taking the fantasy stories that he read in pulp novels and Ray Bradbury and things like that, and bringing them to television, a new medium, and taking science fiction seriously and not like the giant monster films from the 50s. He took science fiction seriously. And that's why I call Serling in the Twilight Zone the father of American popular culture, because you can take any fantasy product, horror, science fiction, you name it, in our modern time, and I could trace it back to a Twilight Zone episode in less than 6 degrees of Serling, I like to pun.
Well, you're going to have to do it in just a couple of minutes because we've got to take this break. I can't wait to hear that. But I hope that's where you were going with that. I just write it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be right back. Y'all come back too.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am so glad that you are here with us. We are having a great conversation, a great time. I just am so excited to be able to have this conversation with Arlen Schumer. He is a fantastic artist. He is an award-winning artist. He's brilliant. And his webpage is arlenschumer.com. And if you go to that, you can see different things. You can see storyboards and his compositions. There's more information than you could shake a stick at. It's got a link to his visual lectures, his Twilight Zone art, his blog. There's just cool stuff here. And I've had so much fun going through it. Arlen, thanks for making it so available.
Oh, it's my pleasure, certainly.
But I spent hours on it. My husband was like, "Who did that?" I said, "That's my guest for Sunday." And he was like, "That's going to be a great show." I said, "Yes, it is."
Wow.
So I am having a great time with you. Now, you were moving into your 6 stages, was it not? 6 separations of Serling?
6 degrees. 6 degrees of Serling.
Thank you. Yes. I am interested.
Well, I was just saying that I can connect any modern science fiction, fantasy, horror product back to a Twilight Zone episode in, less than 6 degrees. So much of our modern fantasy and pop culture was influenced by the Twilight Zone. All of our creators of fantasy and science fiction, Steven Spielberg, Lucas, David Lynch, they were all teenagers when Serling did the Twilight Zone. And Stephen King, another one of Serling's metaphorical children, he wrote in his book, his nonfiction overview of the fantasy and science fiction worlds called Dance Macabre, came out in 1983. He has a whole chapter about the Twilight Zone. And he talks about how the Twilight Zone sparked his imagination when he was a teenager, seeing those episodes for the first time. And that made him end up becoming the Stephen King we know of. And that is true for Spielberg and Lucas and even their descendants like J.J. Abrams and Vince Gilligan, the guy that created Breaking Bad and worked on The X-Files. When Breaking Bad ended, I remember reading an interview with Gilligan, and they asked him, "How do you want your show to be remembered since people are calling it one of the greatest shows on television ever?" And Gilligan said, "If my show can be talked about in the future the way we talk about the Twilight Zone now, I'll be a happy boy." And so that's what I mean when I say he's the father of American popular culture. Ironically, Serling dies in 1975 at the age of 50. I mean, all those cigarettes that he smoked are what killed him. But, he died, unfortunately, thinking that he didn't really succeed at what he wanted to succeed. He wanted to be known as a great writer. He wanted to write the great American novel and the great American stage play like his hero Arthur Miller. And he felt that the Twilight Zone was just a TV show that he did for a few years. We had some good episodes. We had some turkeys. He once was quoted as saying, But he didn't live long enough. If you look at the year 1975, that's when Spielberg comes to fame with Jaws. That's, right before Lucas comes to the fore with Star Wars. That's before, that's the same year that Stephen King debuts with Carrie. So Serling, had he only lived a couple years longer, he would have seen how his metaphorical children had grown up with the mantle of the Twilight Zone and created new works of science fiction and fantasy and horror that were inspired by his brainchild, his magnum opus, The Twilight Zone. So it's sad, it's very bittersweet that even though The Twilight Zone was so influential, Serling unfortunately died right before he really got to see how influential his brainchild would prove to be. So in a way, I'm trying to make up for that in a way with the works that I've done on the Twilight Zone and that I continue to do, like the webinar I have coming up in 2 weeks about the Twilight Zone in this age of the coronavirus and how so many episodes were about isolation and loneliness and solitude.
Absolutely.
And they were very prescient, ahead of their time for exactly what we're going through today.
And it's really funny in a tragic way that so many of his observations on the madness that one can fall into through that are what is being exhibited now.
Well, again, that's the definition of art, is that it should be of its time and timeless. Take Picasso's Guernica, that famous painting. He did it in response to the bombing of the town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. But it's, of course, a great work of art that is timeless about the horrors of any war. And yet, so it was both of its time and it's timeless. So when critics talk about that, to judge a work of art, it has to stand the test of time, that's what they mean. A great work of art should still speak to us generations later. And Twilight Zone, certainly, being 60 plus years old now, has stood the test of time in the fact that it's still speaking to us. And that's what my webinar on Wednesday the 29th will be about, specifically to this coronavirus crisis.
I think that's going to be quite interesting. Are your webinars available after the fact? Do they stay on your YouTube channel?
The way New York Adventure Club has it set up right now is if you buy a ticket, it allows you to access the recorded version of the webinar for about a week afterwards. But I think the head of New York Adventure Club is working on that. And because, he used to do, New York Adventure Club used to be live in-person meetup type events, like walking tours of various things in New York City. But the coronavirus put a halt to all of that. So overnight, a month ago, he had to transfer to webinars. And he was looking for people that were very visually oriented to do webinars, and I was put in touch with him. So this is all new to him, and he's doing a great job, and I'm lucky to have hooked up with him to have this platform to kind of work out of. But I'd like to see eventually, because so many people, they can't make it live. So, you got to just stay tuned, because he's kind of working on this literally as we speak. But for now, I think that's how it works, that if you buy a ticket, you'll get to see it at your leisure, I think for about a week. But again, those details might change. So if you go to NewYorkAdventureClub.com, I think NYAdventureClub.com, you'll get all the details.
Well, I have made that note because I do a show on Wednesday nights also, Paranormal Experienced, and
oh, so there you go.
I'll be on the air while you're doing your lecture.
Right. But
and I really want to see that.
But like I said, so you still got to buy a ticket. It's only $10. Double your money back if not satisfied.
Well, I can't imagine not being satisfied. So I'm good with that.
To quote the guy from The Office, that's what she said.
I will tell you later what the following sentence to that is. Down here.
Hello.
I'm not going there here. But, it's funny because in chat, we've got someone who's posted the 2 Twilight Zones that traumatized them forever, right? And I think everyone has that with that show, which I find very interesting, especially for that time frame. But people were still used to using their imaginations then, right? You just come from the era of radio dramas and things of that nature, the shadow knows. There's so much that we are not as adept, or we've kind of lost that ability to put our imagination to work with them. And now, with this generation, they've got the most incredible graphics, the greatest visual tools for learning and playing and entertaining. It's funny to me that this same group of people love podcasts and virtually interacting together like a real team when they're playing games together and things of that nature. I just find it fascinating because it's like we lost that ability in the 70s and 80s, I think, to a degree, because television was new and you had to have that visual, and you went to the movies and it was a very personal experience, not necessarily like a go team kind of a thing. And now it seems to be drawing back to using their own imaginations in some ways. There's others that it's really tragically not there. But it's almost like everything old is new again. It just keeps repeating itself. What do you think of that?
I'm trying to respond. What is your main point?
My main point is that coming out of having to use their imagination to create the visuals for what they were hearing with the radio shows, people embraced the shows that they embraced television. Okay. And so now, while we have all these amazing graphics and all these other things, and people seem to be isolating themselves in their homes doing like video games and things of that nature, which have fantastic graphics and everything is interesting, they're still reaching out to each other, but they're still having to use socialization skills to do something that wouldn't necessarily, you don't have to be interactive with someone to do that. You're working your own gig as you're playing your video games. But they're reaching out to share the imagination experience instead of just isolating themselves with the television, which is what happened, I feel like, in the late 60s, early 70s, into the 80s. People were just... I don't think I'm saying this very well because you still look confused.
I'm listening to you. I'm just trying to figure out how to respond. So what are you saying? You're saying now that everything is so visual that I'm trying to get what your point is.
People are choosing to come together while using their imagination to live the experience. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm talking in a circle. I don't know how to say it better.
Okay, so
we can just bypass that one.
Well, I guess one of the things I would say is that, in a more general sense, social media has brought people on the one hand closer together virtually. You can talk to people across the world and, FaceTime and do things that, when I was a kid, we never could do. We dreamed about stuff like this. And yet, ironically, one might say people are more further apart emotionally than ever. I go to New York City when you were still able to go to New York City. And I see young couples sitting together and she's on her phone and he's on his phone. They're not interacting. I see here in the suburban town I live in on the weekends, and this is all back when we could go out and, share communal experiences. I used to see, divorced fathers on the weekends. It's their turn with the kids, or they're the working fathers during the week. And on Saturday, the wife gets to sleep in and he's got the kids. The kid is on his cell phone and the father's on the cell phone. And they're not interacting and sharing their experience. So are people actually closer together because of social media? On the one hand, they are. And on the other hand, social media has made us more distant from each other. It's a very weird conundrum.
It is a very weird conundrum. And with that, we have to take our top of the hour break. This is a great time to get your beverage refilled, to stretch your legs, maybe do a few cartwheels, just rock your socks. And maybe, hate to say this, but I'm ever hopeful that maybe there's a little bit of good news in here. So we'll be this after back. Y'all come back.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Congressional lawmakers say they are close to a deal for another round of emergency funding for small businesses and others hurt during the pandemic. At a press briefing at the White House tonight, President Trump said he thinks an agreement could be reached as soon as tomorrow. NPR's Matthew Schwartz reports the first round of funding quickly ran out.
It took about 2 weeks before the $349 billion Paycheck Protection Act was completely out of money. Some banks reported receiving thousands of applications per hour. Now, as Congress negotiates the next round of funding, Democrats say that this time they want more money to go to hospitals and local and state governments. They also want to earmark billions for coronavirus testing. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke about the bill on ABC's This Week.
The key that opens the door to the economy is testing, testing, testing.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin told CNN a deal is imminent, but he said funding for states would not be included. Matthew Schwartz, NPR News, Washington.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker says the state expects to get millions of masks, gloves, and other medical supplies from China this week. Lee Gaines from member station WILL has more.
Pritzker says it's unusual for a state to airlift emergency medical supplies from a foreign country during a time of crisis. But he says that's the situation Illinois and every other state across the country is in. He says they're competing with each other and the federal government for personal protective equipment and other medical supplies. Pritzker says the state has also been approached by scammers.
People have tried to contact us to get us signed up for, delivery of PPE that doesn't exist.
The FBI says they're aware of multiple incidents in which state governments have wired money to scammers pretending to sell medical equipment. For NPR News, I'm Lee Gaines.
As of tonight, face masks are now required for both workers and customers in Pennsylvania. And those who don't have one on can't get into the store. Steffi Carper works for a delivery service, and she says she's made wearing a mask a habit.
The only way to ever stop this is to start implementing harsh, guidelines. And if that's what they need to do, then do it.
The governor's order does allow businesses selling medication, medical supplies, or food to provide delivery service or no-contact pickup services. In Canada, at least 10 people are dead after a gunman went on a 12-hour shooting rampage in Nova Scotia. Assistant Police Commissioner Lee Bergerman says a Royal Mounted Police officer was among those killed.
It's with tremendous sadness that I share with you that we have lost Constable Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year veteran of the force.
Authorities say a 51-year-old gunman was killed after a long manhunt. There is still no word on a motive. U.S. futures contracts are trading lower at this hour. Dow futures contract down a fraction. This is NPR. Thousands of Israelis took to the streets in Tel Aviv today, protesting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempts to form an emergency government with his chief rival, Benny Gantz, to deal with the coronavirus. Demonstrators wearing face masks accused Netanyahu of using the pandemic to escape prosecution on corruption charges. Netanyahu has been charged with fraud, breach of justice, and accepting bribes. He denies the charges, says he's a victim of the hostile media and aggressive police. Gantz had previously said he wouldn't sit in a government with the prime minister, but changed his mind last month. An aide to Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte says President Trump called his boss today to discuss ways to cooperate in the coronavirus pandemic. NPR's Julie McCarthy has more.
The Philippines was the first among Southeast Asian countries to lock down. President Duterte put some 50 million Filipinos under stay-at-home orders as he shut down the largest island of Luzon until the end of the month. But as the lockdown enters its fifth week, police report thousands of violators each day. An angry President Duterte said he was asking for discipline. He told his countrymen if they didn't comply with the quarantine, the military and police would take over. It's like martial law, Duterte warned. You choose. Significant upticks in the daily tally continue in the Philippines, with overcrowded jails and prisons especially vulnerable. Julie McCarthy, NPR News.
Crude oil prices are trading lower in overnight Asian trading, down 10.8% at $16.28 a barrel. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News in Washington.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Walden University. At Walden, they see greatness in you, and they have a doctoral degree program that can help you reach your full potential. Turn your passion into power and ignite your career. Learn more about our online doctoral programs at waldenu.edu/doc.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Hello there. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. I am so excited to have my guest, Arlen Schumer, here. And, we're going into our second hour. And if you missed that first hour, oh my goodness, it was fantastic. But no worries, because you can still take a chance to listen to our archives in so many places. You can get it on Spreaker. You can hear us on iTunes, the Apple Podcast, or iTunes, iHeartRadio, anyway, so many places. And I am just thrilled to have you do that. We are having a great conversation. I just talked myself into a circle and gave poor Arlen a stroke. He's back now. And I am so glad to have you here. I think this has been just a fantastic first hour. I'm looking forward to the second one.
So am I, Kat. I'm having a great time.
I'm glad. So
I love talking about the things that I love.
I know. Isn't that funny how that works?
Yep.
That's why you don't... my dad always told me if I found what I like to do, I'd never work a day in my life. I think that I work harder at what I like to do because I want to be the best at it. But it's still so much fun. I don't mind a bit.
Well, in many ways, that is the American dream,
I do know. I was late finding it.
Well, better late than never, certainly.
Absolutely.
A lot of people go through life and they never find it.
Isn't that true? I find that to be true. You'll hear somebody, there's an old man in Key West named Norman who lives over the store of the Blue Heaven. And he is just happy as a clam right there. He's from New York. His sister lives there. So he's just an old Rasta guy who's a great conversationalist. And every time I see him, he says, "Why do you want to talk to me?" I said, "I like your stories." So I buy him a beer and I hear his stories.
Did you know the Rastafarians are descended from the Ethiopian Jews who considered marijuana a sacrament? And they thought that the burning bush that Moses smoked on top of Mount Sinai was marijuana. That gave him the insight to come up with the 10 Commandments. And that's why the Rastafarians treat marijuana the way they do.
I did not know that. Thank you for that education. That explains a lot about Norman. Really, and I'm not kidding. I think he is one of the best people I've ever met. And now
Yeah, but now he's the second best person, right?
Right. Because you do all the stuff I absolutely love and enjoy. And you've got Batman behind you.
Yes.
So that's a good thing in my book.
I'm a big Batman fan.
Me too. I used to get so bent because we had some place that my dad liked to go on Sunday nights, and he thought it was character building Sunday afternoons. He thought it was character building, and it was something that mattered a lot to him, so he wanted it to matter to me. And I would be so bent because sometimes we would run late getting home, and I would have missed Batman.
Oh, on the reruns? That's how you grew up with it, on Sunday afternoons?
Sunday night. Mm-hmm.
Sunday night. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a little older than you, Kat, so I was there for the very first episode of the TV series. And my brother and I, my older brother, I was 8.5 or so. No, I was 7.5. My brother was 9. And we were big comic book fans at the time. We were reading them for a couple of years. I learned how to read from comics before I learned how to read in school. And I was a big Batman fan. And remember, I was also a big James Bond fan. We were expecting that Batman was going to be treated as seriously, and I use the word serious in quotes, as the Connery Bond films. I mean, Thunderball had just come out in December of '65, a month before the Batman TV series. Now, even though Connery had his famous comedic quips, and the Bond films had a little bit of humor in them, they were serious spy films. Mm-hmm. And we were expecting Batman to be treated as serious as Connery Bond. So imagine, we're watching that very first episode. We're on our knees in front of the television like an altar. Because the build up to the Batman TV series debuting in '66, I can only describe that to younger people. Imagine the first 3 Star Wars rolled into one. That's how big. You got to remember, the only superhero ever on TV was the old George Reeves Superman series that we grew up with in reruns. Yeah. So the idea of Batman coming on TV was mind-blowing for our young minds at the time. So we're watching the very first episode, and so far it starts out, the crime, and they introduce the Riddler and, Wayne Mansion, and all that stuff is fine. And then Batman and Robin get in their Batmobile, and, that's kind of cool. And they get to the scene of the crime, and they have to climb up the building, that classic thing where they're climbing up the side of the building. And, of course, Kat, as I'm telling you this, I can remember it like it was only yesterday, even though it was, 54 years ago. But I'm telling you, they get to the window on the 6th floor that they want to break into because the Riddler's in there. And the window has bars, metal bars. So Batman reaches into his utility belt, pulls out his bat laser torch, and he burns off the bars. And Robin takes the metal bars, and he's about to drop them 6 stories below to the ground when Batman stops him and says, "Hold on, chum. If you drop those bars, you might injure innocent civilians." So he takes out from his utility belt a bat suction cup with a hook, sticks it to the brick wall, takes the bars, and hangs them on the hook. My brother and I, kneeling in front of the TV like an altar, simultaneously we turn towards each other, and at the same time we go, "They're making fun of Batman." Now, we didn't know the word camp. That was an intellectual word we learned years later. But we knew they were making fun of Batman. The first episode where he goes into the discotheque. I mean, can you imagine Sean Connery going into a discotheque and doing a Bond dance? That never would have happened.
No, it would not.
And yet they did it with Batman. And fans to this day, even fans my age, they go, "Oh, but I was a kid then. I didn't know that." I said, I was a kid then, and I knew they were making fun of Batman. Because if you were fans of the comics, specifically the ones drawn by Carmine Infantino, starting in 1964, 2 years before the series, it was called the New Look in Batman because Infantino was DC Comics' greatest artist. And all of this is documented in my Silver Age book. That Infantino looked nothing like Adam West, that Infantino Batman. No. He was a cool those Batman stories, had they adapted those, it would have been much cooler, more like the way Quentin Tarantino might treat Batman. And yet we got this campy, oafish, comedic Batman. Now, when I talk to James Bond fans, like on Facebook, I tell them, can you imagine if instead of getting the first 5 Bond films with Connery. Imagine if the very first Bond film was the version of Casino Royale that they made in 1967, which they made as a farce, as a campy comedy. Imagine if that had been the very first Bond film in 1962 instead of Dr. No. Fans of the Bond books by Ian Fleming would have been outraged had they seen their hero played as a goof, played campily. And that's how we and a bunch of Batman fans, to this day, we have a love-hate relationship. Some people hate it. But when I say love-hate, there were things I liked about it, the pop art aspect, the logo, the music, the bright colors. But as a Batman fan, there are more things I hate about it. And the fact that William Dozier, the producer, he ran the show right into the ground. I mean, after the first Riddler 2-parter, the show never got any better. In fact, every episode was literally a carbon copy of that formula because Dozier hated comic books. He thought they were junk. He thought the only way to do comics was campily. So thank God the artist Neil Adams came along in 1968, right after the show was canceled and taken off the air. And in one issue in the summer of 68 gives us what we know of as the Dark Knight. Yes. There would be no Dark Knight today if it wasn't for what Neil Adams did in 1968. That would go to influence a young reader and artist named Frank Miller, who's around my age. So there'd be no Dark Knight today, which was the impetus to get the movie made in 1989. There would be no Dark Knight today if it wasn't for what Neil Adams did. And if Neil Adams hadn't done what he did, Batman would have been left in the shambles of the campy TV show.
Well, thank goodness for him. Because I think that I actually like the camp too. I like camp. But it's so bad because
there's nothing wrong with camp. There's nothing wrong with camp, but
well, not like what matters to you.
Let me tell you something. If the Lord of the Rings had been treated campily, fans of Lord of the Rings would have burned down the movie studios.
Yes, they would.
The reason why Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones are succeeded is because they did not go the camp route. They treated the material as seriously as the creators treated it in the books. Yes. George Lucas did not set out to make a campy science fiction film.
No, he did not.
The point I'm trying to make is there's a place for camp, but the reason why these superhero movies today are successful, they're not treated campily. It took 20 years to get rid of the stench of the Batman campy series. That, the whole point is we knew when we were kids, when I was 10 years old, me and my comic book buddies knew that if Hollywood treated superheroes seriously, like they were in the comics, they would be great movies.
Yes,
It only took about 40 years, Kat, because the generation of the William Doziers who thought comics were junk and can only be treated campily, they had to kind of die off. Like the Israelites in the desert who sinned and had no faith in God. God made them wander the desert for 40 years and were not allowed to enter the promised land.
Yeah.
The generation in Hollywood that thought comics were junk had to die off. The people that are greenlighting all these movies are basically my generation and younger that grew up thinking comics were great as they were. And when I say serious, I mean not that there weren't comedic elements and some humor, but I'm talking about like the early Connery Bond films, which are great spy films. You look at From Russia with Love. That's almost Hitchcockian. If Alfred Hitchcock directed a Bond, my point is, so the point is we like our fantasy treated with respect, with realism, and it's okay to have a little, comedic, comic relief, as they say, and a couple of quips here and there. That's why Connery was so successful with Bond, because of those little quips.
Yes.
But in general, they're not campy and they're not farces. But for some reason, it's okay with Batman, the coolest superhero of all. It's okay to be campy and funny with Batman, and that's only because that's what people were given.
Yeah.
If
But you know what?
William I blame William Dozier, the producer.
Well, let's just slap that on him, but we're going to go take a break right quick. We'll be
Okay.
right back, and thank you all for being
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us. And we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio. This has been such a great show so far. It just keeps getting better and better. I am here with Arlen Schumer, and I am having the best time, Arlen. Thank you so much. Well, a little bit of a rocky start, but man, are you amazing. I am so glad you're here. Now, we are having a good time. We have questions in chat now. So do you feel like taking a couple of them? All right. I will, because I'm not bashful at all. Let's see. I do know that the first one was, what is your favorite? Do you have a favorite Twilight Zone episode? Yes.
is the epitome of the Twilight Zone as black and white television art. And even though if you know the Twilight Zone shtick, if you're a young person, you come to see that episode for the first time, oh yeah, I get it. You know, they can predict ahead of time because they've been trained that the Twilight Zone are these surprise ending pieces of entertainment. Oh yeah, you know, she's going to be pretty and they're going to be ugly. Well, to really judge it as a work of art, you got to imagine people in 1960 seeing it for the first time when the Twilight Zone was relatively new, when every other TV show, and I'm not kidding, every other TV show was a Western.
That's true.
So
yes,
in the middle of these cardboard cutout Western shows is this bizarre, I mean, they must have seen my transmissions from another planet. That's how surreal and bizarre some of them are, to be sandwiched in between these horrible cookie cutter forgotten Westerns. But again, it's also timeless as a work of art because metaphorically, the episode still speaks to us as about the individual versus the state, about the individual versus society. We are all Janet Tyler. That's the name of the patient under the bandages. We are all Janet Tylers that wrap ourselves with bandages in order to fit in with society so that we will look like everybody else. And the process of art, of being an artist, is to unwrap those bandages. The process of discovering yourself in life is all about discovering your uniqueness, what makes you an individual, what you can offer to the world. And that only comes when you unwrap those bandages that we put on ourselves, that we're trained by society to look like everybody, act like everybody, fit in, go along with the crowd. I mean, these are all, kind of, 20th century cliches about the individual versus society, but they're true. They're eternal struggles. And that's why Eye the Beholder is the greatest Twilight Zone episode.
Well, I
hope that answers that question.
It did, but nobody heard it for the first 5 seconds because I don't know if they just said they couldn't hear you, and I started fooling with stuff, and they can hear you. But it's called The Eye of the Beholder. They did get why it's your favorite. They just didn't know which one was your favorite. And I think that probably was the one that took me by surprise the most. Because I like what you said about it relating to now. And everybody is like, I know exactly what he's talking about. Oh, yes, we've got that. So it's all good. But, except for the fact that you said it so much better. So,
the other thing is when you look at those pig faces, today's special effects, if they were doing that Twilight Zone episode today, they would make them really ugly with drippy, oozy, gooey, today's special effects makeup. Mm-hmm. What's great about those Twilight Zones is those masks, those pig faces, they ride the line between comedy and tragedy. They're both incredibly ugly and horrible looking, but at the same time, there's also something very black, comedic, funny about them. They almost look goofy. Now, yes. To ride the line between goofy and horrible, as in horror, that is a very tough line to ride. When, you either go on one side of the line or the other. But to ride it right down the middle, where you don't know whether to laugh at those pig faces or be recoiled in shock from them, that is the brilliance of the Twilight Zone in that specific episode, and the makeup by a guy named William Tuttle. That's the brilliance of those masks, where, again, if they were to do it today, chances are it would be over the top, drippy, gooey, oozy type of ugly special effects. So that's why I love the Twilight Zone.
Well, I think that's probably why most people do, because you don't know what to expect. It seems to be just a surprise And sometimes you see it coming, but often I didn't. I just loved it, though. So, yeah, Mark said Donna Douglas was the main character. So they're keeping up in chat.
Nice.
So thank you. But, you know, she really was quite lovely.
Hey, Donna Douglas only plays the woman when the bandages come off. All during the episode, the woman is played by another actress who only recently passed away named Maxine Stewart. And she was an older woman, and for whatever reason, they decided to use her. If you watch that episode, you'll see how she acts so much with her hands. Her arms and her hands are so gestural, and really there's a beauty to them. And the way she acts, being that she couldn't act with her face, she had to act with her body, with her hands, and almost like an expert mime would act. That's what, again, carries that episode. And then the minute her bandages come off, they switch to Donna Douglas for her youthful, you know, classic blonde beauty.
She was beautiful, I think. But, you know, that actually, the gestural acting that you just referenced, I have friends who play monsters in movies. Like real monsters, like famous monsters sometimes. And they point out that it's so difficult to act when you can't use your face. Because they're in prosthesis or masks or makeup or, you know, whatever. And it's just really difficult. So Maxine Stewart must have been very gifted to be able to pull that off.
Yeah.
That's
when you watch the episode again, now that we've talked about it, you watch the way she acts with her hands.
I will.
And you'll be blown away by it. Trust me.
I can't wait now. I'm going to have to go and find it online.
Yeah.
Sherry said, what did you think of the one with the tiki guy? She still dreams about that.
The one with the what?
The tiki god.
Well, that's not a Twilight Zone episode. That's something that was made. Is she referring to the Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black, with the little tiki doll that comes to life to kill the woman in the apartment?
She was pretty much staying with Twilight Zone going through there. She may have gotten them crossed. So.
Well, the minute she says tiki doll, I don't know what the only thing I can think of is Richard Matheson, one of the Twilight Zone writers after Serling, in terms of quantity of episodes. He did a thing in 1972 called Trilogy of Terror with 3 40-minute segments on ABC Movie of the Week. And one of them was called Amelia, and it was about the actress Karen Black in a New York apartment gets a tiki doll as a gift, and it comes to life to kill her. And if you've never seen it, track that down. And it's basically Matheson's remake of a Twilight Zone episode with the great actress Agnes Moorehead, who plays a woman in a barn being menaced by these 3 tiny little, what look like little aliens or something. And one by one, she kills each one of them, and then she smashes the ship they came in. And it turns out they're American astronauts that landed on a planet of giants. So Matheson basically remade that as Amelia with Karen Black 11 years later.
Well, she's.
But if that's what if that's what the person was referring to, but it's not a Twilight Zone episode.
Well, she said earlier in chat when we first started, the 2 Twilight Zones that traumatized me forever were the little tiki dude and the lady that kept watching the small spider down the sink. And every time it kept coming
by the way,
bigger.
Neither of those are Twilight Zone episodes.
What is the second one? Do you know?
The spider down the sink?
And it kept coming back bigger every time.
No, that's not Twilight Zone. You know, all the years I've been lecturing about the Twilight Zone to a live audience, if I told you, Kat, invariably somebody comes up to me after the lecture, around my age and says, I remember this Twilight Zone episode when I was a kid. It really scared me. And they describe an episode. And I say to them when they're done describing it, I said, you know what? That's not a Twilight Zone episode. Twilight Zone was so successful that it became the kind of brand name for similar types of dramas, like a lot of Alfred Hitchcock episodes, One Step Beyond, you name it, whatever they might be. And people think they were Twilight Zone episodes, but they're not. Neither episode that she mentions is a Twilight Zone episode.
That is so bizarre. But
now, it might be, by the way, one of the remakes of the Twilight Zones. There have been 2 or 3 syndicated versions, one in 1985 and another one in 1998, and then I think a third one in 2002. And then, of course, there's the recent ones on CBS All Access by the producer Jordan Peele. So she might be referring to one of the newer episodes from these syndicated versions, but I'm not that familiar with those syndicated versions because I think they basically suck. I will never pretend that I know anything about them specifically. I'll only claim ownership of the original Twilight Zone. Not ownership, but meaning in terms of being able to talk about it with any kind of knowledge and insight.
Well, she was like, well, what the heck was I watching then? I don't know.
Like I said, One Step Beyond, Alfred Hitchcock. Later on, there was Tales from the Dark Side, depending on how old she is. Who knows? And like I said, it might be an episode in these new Twilight Zones that were syndicated, but that, I don't consider canon.
Well, she said it was in black and white, so...
Well, like I said, it could have been Alfred Hitchcock.
Options there.
It could have been Outer Limits. People mistake Outer Limits episodes for Twilight Zone, even though they were 1 hour long compared to the half hour. So, listen, that's the way people are. They tend to confuse things if they came out around the same time, and they're
especially
the same.
When we're younger,
yeah.
Well, that is too cool. And she loved Tales from the Dark Side, too. She is also a paranormal investigator, so she's a trip. Now, let me find her other question here. Oh, I think you covered this, but I'm curious if there's more. Excuse me. Who do you totally respect in your field? Someone that you feel you're the most like? I think those are going to be 2 separate questions, usually.
Okay, she wants to know who I think I am most like?
In your art. And who do you totally respect in your field? Are they the same person?
Okay, so those are 2 different questions.
Yes, they are.
I know who I've been influenced by. I mean, I don't think there's anybody like me. We're all taught we're like snowflakes, right? We're all individuals. And, there's nobody like me. My mother used to say to me, they broke the mold when they made me. And that's true. There's only one Arlen Schumer. But I totally wear my influences on my sleeve. And I know the people and the things that have influenced me. And I've named some of them during this radio interview, whether Neil Adams, Jim Steranko was the other god of comic book art. Those were my biggest comic book influences. And then, like I said, Serling and Twilight Zone and Connery and Bond. And, the list goes on. And the music of Bruce Springsteen, the life of Bruce Springsteen, the integrity that he has been an influence. So there's my influences. And since I consider myself a pop artist who takes the works of my influences and tries to reconfigure and recontextualize them and put them back out as works of art or graphic design or presentation. So those are my influences, but there's nobody like me. What was the second question?
Actually, I think
or
it was who did you most... Someone that you greatly respected in your field and someone who was similar to you?
Yeah. Okay. So I think I answered that, right?
I think you did a great job of answering that.
Thanks.
So, well, I know that you are just now doing this webinar on the 22nd and then on the 29th for the New York Adventures Club, but you've been doing your visual lectures for a while.
Yeah.
This isn't something new to you, even though it is to them.
Right.
How did you come up with calling them that? Because the ones that I watched were brilliant. And I subscribe to your channel because I'm going to watch the rest of them. But
thanks.
It's a really good concept to call them that.
Well, it's funny, the word lecture is such a pejorative. It sounds like you're being lectured at. Mm-hmm. Now, most people know in academic worlds when they say, oh, I'm going to go see a lecture, they usually know what that means. A speaker gets up there and he's got some visuals. But, we've all been to boring lectures where a guy is droning or a woman is droning on and an image is sitting up there on the screen. I mean, I've gone to comic conventions my whole life. And if I told you such a visual medium like comics have had some of the worst visual presentations. I mean, artists talking about comic art with no visuals at all.
Oh, my.
So again, here I am, a very visual person. I studied graphic design at Rhode Island School of Design, which is a great art school. And graphic design is words and pictures working together. Comics are words and pictures working together. Lectures are words and pictures. They're spoken words and pictures. So as a very visual person, when I went to do my first lecture over 30 years ago, and it was about the Twilight Zone, my feeling is you got to give people a show. A lecture is still a show. Even though it might have academic, serious content, you're still entertaining people. So when I kid around with the word edutainment, I take that very seriously. So right from the beginning, my lectures were going to be as visual as they were verbal. Now, the verbal component is me talking about the images behind me, but I'll sometimes show 300 images in an hour. Now, you won't realize you've been shown 300 images, but because I keep them moving, I literally have an image to illustrate practically every sentence that comes out of my mouth. So even if you don't want to pay attention to me, the visuals are telling their own story, and you could just watch the visuals of any one of my lectures. So about 10 years ago, when I was trying to promote what I do, I was trying to come up with a word or a name to brand what I do as different from what people expect when they hear the word lecture, which they associate, like I said, with something kind of boring and being lectured to. But the only thing I could come up with was the phrase visual lecture because they share the letter L, the end of the word visual and the beginning of the word lecture, so I could kind of brand it. But I couldn't come up with another word for lecture. If you just say presentation, a presentation can be anything. It could be, a set of still images. It could be an exhibit. The only thing that really stands for lecture, meaning somebody is talking to you and showing you images while they're talking, I can't come up with another word. So if anybody out there listening has a better word than lecture, let me know, because I'm kind of stuck with lecture. So I'm hoping that at least when they hear or see the word visual lecture, they know that it's going to be something strong visually. So if they come to either of my webinars, and by the way, the webinar format was a perfect translation of the live lecture format, because you're basically talking to people while you show them images on the screen. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's been an easy transition for me to make. So when you come to my art and comic art webinar Wednesday night, you'll see, 300 to 400 images in the hour to an hour and a half that I'm talking. My Twilight Zone webinar the following Wednesday on the 29th will also be a combination of still images from the show with video clips that I'm going to show to talk about the episodes, but also very visual. A week later, May 6th, I think Wednesday, I'm going to be doing my first Bruce Springsteen webinar, where I'm going to be doing kind of Bruce Springsteen's greatest video hits, that I'll be showing video clips along with still images chronologically moving through his career. So, like I said, you could turn off the sound with any one of my presentations and still get an incredible, entertaining, educational presentation just by the amount and the way I sequence my images.
Well, I think that your work is fantastic, but we have to take our last break, and we will be right back. So thank you so much, and if you've got any questions, get them in there.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour. Welcome back. You are listening to Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. And we are into our final segment, believe it or not, with Arlen Schumer. And this has been such a great show. I know that we've had a lot of questions in chat. We have had a good time. And I know that we ran a little bit late due to some technical difficulties thanks to the weather. I'm assuming the weather. But thank God for backup equipment. So we're good. Arlen, I have had just the best time with this conversation with you. I have appreciated every minute of it. We were talking about your visual lectures and the fact that you have 2 events coming up in the next 2 weeks. I'm looking forward to getting my ticket so that I can go back and see them, because
right.
I think they are going to be so fantastic. Do people buy the ticket through the New York Adventure Club website or?
Yes. nyadventureclub.com will get you to them. I think right now the only one that's posted is this coming Wednesday's Art and Comic Art, but I think starting tomorrow, they'll be posting the Twilight Zone lecture webinar, on the 29th. And then probably a week from tomorrow, they'll post the Bruce Springsteen webinar on Wednesday, May 6th. But the bottom line is nyadventureclub.com is the place to go to for all of these webinars.
Okay, well, we will post that as well when we post the show.
Yeah, I think I've emailed you, given you all of that information. And I know I posted it on all the Facebook places that you tagged me. So all that information, I'm very good. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to giving the people I'm working with complete information. So all of your listeners that follow you on Facebook and on all the various groups, all that information for the next 2 webinars should be up there.
Well, I am going to tell you that was one of the best surprises that I've had, is that you are so fantastic about getting everything I would possibly need to do show prep. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Well, if you don't already know each other, you need to know.
Hey, I love spreading the love. I love sharing my work. I love turning people onto it. That's a great joy in my life, to share the things that I love. It's all about spreading the love and sharing the love. All of the things that I do are really all about love. All of my projects have a lot of love in them. It's the love that I have for the work. It's the love that I have for my career. It's the love that I have for what I do. I mean, it's all about love.
I like that. I love that.
And,
it's really special.
A cook. I love the Food Network show. I like that Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, because cooks will tell you that, I think indigenous peoples will say that when you cook with love, the love actually goes into the food and makes the food taste better.
Absolutely.
And, this gets into spiritual, religious type of implications. But the bottom line is, when I say it's all love, truth is beauty, beauty is truth, truth is love, love is beauty. And it's like a Mobius strip. All of these things are synonymous. And, what defines an artist theoretically is that we love what we do. That's why artists have traditionally been ripped off by society, going back to the caveman times probably, because we love what we do. The powers that be think, well, then wouldn't you do it for free? Why should we even pay you?
Yes, they do
this
think
is something that artists have struggled with, for centuries, is getting rewarded for the work we do, because the fact that we love what we do is often used against us.
I think that's absolute truth. And I do think that goes back to the first cave drawings.
Robert Crumb, the great underground cartoonist, one of the greatest cartoonists of our times. And we could do a whole interview just about Robert Crumb. But he did a story many years ago, probably 20 years ago, where he draws himself as a caveman artist. And it's a little story about what it must have been like to have been one of those caveman artists. And he talks about how, he wasn't one of the alpha males that went and fought the woolly mammoth and came back and got the choicest cuts of meat. He was thrown the bones, the scraps, because he was the cave artist. Nobody cared about the stupid pictures he was, painting on the cave walls. And yet, hundreds of thousands of years later, that's what remains and that's what we see. But Crumb, told a great story about how even artists back then were being treated like crap.
Do you think it's because they just know that you're going to do your work anyway, or assume that you're going to do your work anyway because it is a labor of love? Or do you think sometimes they're envious and they don't want to give the value?
Well, I'd probably say all of the above. But like I said before, primarily it's because of this attitude of, why should we pay you if you would do what you would do for nothing? And, you ask most artists, they have to do what they do. That's what makes us artists. That's what not makes us laymen, is that we have to be artists. We have to do what we do. And that's, again, in a very cutthroat capitalist society, that is used against us.
Yeah.
And artists have struggled, not just visual artists, writers, musicians. This is an ongoing struggle. And like I said, it goes back down through the ages. Hence the, starving artist cliche. But, on the one hand, this society rewards its artists, so you get the top tier in any field is being handsomely rewarded. People like Warhol, were rich men. But, at the same time, for every, successful artist, there's, 1,000 that are struggling.
At least. I agree.
At least.
It's interesting when you say that artists have to do what they do because that's who they are. That made me think of I used to live near a railroad, and it would go by, and it was a lot of fun because of the tagging on the rail cars.
Yes.
People who don't have other options can buy an 88-cent can of paint and express themselves. And
ironically, graffiti art became an accepted art form in the early 21st century. And they've actually taken those images and put them in galleries and things like that. One of the comic book artists I lecture on, Will Eisner, who is the father of the graphic novel and created this character, the Spirit, who they made into a kind of a crappy movie about 10 years ago. But he was known in the Spirit artwork that you can research online in the late 40s for incorporating the word the Spirit into the city environment that these adventures of the character the Spirit took place in. So Eisner might draw the word the Spirit as a building. So when you look at it, it looks like a building, but then you can see the letters Spirit in it. And according to a lot of graffiti artists, they talk about how Eisner's Spirit was an influence on them when they went to make their letters in these urban city environments. So that's another way that I show in my upcoming webinar the relationship between art and comic book art. And I show how Eisner's incorporation of the word Spirit into his city environments was a direct influence on many of the great graffiti artists.
Well, I think that's amazing, but I think where I was going is that there are people who have no other form of expressing themselves, but who have to, and they're brilliant. And I would see those trains go by every day, and some of them I could make out, what it was. Most of it I couldn't. But again, the can of paint, 88 cents to get a bottle of Krylon. And they were just, it's amazing. But I definitely saw what you were talking about when you said, people know that you have to do that. I think that's really the coolest thing. Because
listen, musicians, writers, they all say the same thing.
Dancers.
Listen, you can go to art school, you can go to music school. They'll teach you various tricks of the trade and technique, but you either are an artist or you're not. And what I try to do in my life when I meet people, back when we could meet people.
Hopefully we can again.
Yeah, hopefully we can again. But one of my jobs, and I use the word job in quotes, is I try to unearth in people who don't think of themselves as artists. I try to get them to maybe realize that they might be suppressing the artist in them, that if people were trained to be creative, like they're trained to work out their muscles and their bodies, if they took artistic training as seriously, they might discover that they have artistic acumen, that they just, like I said, it's like a muscle that hasn't been exercised.
Exactly.
And a lot of people don't realize, because of years of indoctrination, I can't be a writer, I can't be a musician, I have to make a living, I have to do this, I have to do that. So I try when I meet people to sense if they've got what I call the soul of an artist, and I try to bring that out because to me, again, it's a form of love. to get people to realize that they could be artistic if they just give it a little work. It's all about putting the time in, like anything else. What you choose to spend time on is, you are what you do with your time.
Yes. I talked about trying to draw and feeling that I couldn't do it if I didn't have lots of time and whatever. I would get so frustrated because my composition is great, right? But I couldn't make it go from my eye through my fingers. So I bought...
Yeah, but that's because it takes time. Drawing is a skill. People think, again, drawing is some pixie dust magic. Drawing is a skill of coordinating what you're seeing with what you're putting down with a pencil and paper or a computer screen or whatever. And the more you practice that, it's no different than throwing a baseball or a football or a basketball into a hoop. The more you do it, the better you'll be at it. But people don't want to put the time in. It's all about time.
I tried to. But at that time, I was going through the raising children and working the corporate world and all that stuff.
Of course, you didn't have the time.
So I bought a camera.
There you go.
And I don't do a lot of editing on my pictures because I figure if they're not good when I take them, I'm not going to sell them. But anyway, I think that
the great photographers back when there was film to shoot, Kat,
yeah,
and there were 36 images on a contact sheet.
Yep.
The great photographers will tell you if you got one good image out of 36, that was considered successful.
Absolutely.
And again, this comes back down to the time. A lot of laymen think that, the first thing that they put down on paper is going to be great. No. Like anything else, you have to work on it.
Well, that's like the first time I went into a gallery, and my husband was so shocked that I had the audacity to walk in and they took them. He was in what they were selling them for, and he was the next morning, he's like, come on, let's go. You take some more pictures. We're going to get, and I was like, we missed that light about 4 hours ago. We are not going to take pictures with the sun dead up over us. But, because there are things, I took pictures of the things that I was wanting so badly to draw. And I would set them up the way that I wanted them to appear. So while I do still try to draw, I try to draw my pictures. And I'm getting better. But I have a lot of time now. So nice. I will do that. Thanks to you. I will continue to try to bring them through my hands.
In art, practice, like in athletics, does make perfect. Maybe not perfect, but practice makes better.
Yeah, it does make better. I just don't even know how to tell you how much I have enjoyed this conversation with you. And I appreciate that being a message that you sent out, because there's so many people who are so creative and they don't really use it.
Something, Kat, what's interesting about this shutdown with the self-quarantining and the social distancing, to most freelance artists who work out of their home like me, my lifestyle hasn't changed one bit. Other than once a week I would go to New York City for my social and cultural life. I can't do that now. My daily life is basically the same. I'm home all day. I'm behind the computer. I'm at the drawing board. I have TV for company and music. And once a week, I forage for food or I order in. So all kidding aside, what's interesting now is laymen are discovering what the artist's life is like to be home, and not to have a job to go to, but to have to self-generate and have the discipline to get up and produce work and create stuff in a sense, on your own without having a boss over you. So I think it's actually like any negative situation in life, there's always something positive to be gleaned out of even the worst negative situation. And one thing that I think a lot of laymen are learning through this experience is what it's like to be an artist. And it could be a great thing, and it could get them to discover a lot of the things we've been talking about, that now that they're home and they don't go to work, they have to self-generate, in a sense, art. And I think it's a good thing that it's probably awoken in a lot of people across the country and world the inner artist in them.
I would agree. And I do think that's beautiful. That's fantastic, actually.
Well, thank you, Kat. It's been a pleasure being here and talking with you about these things. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thanks for being willing to come, and I do apologize for the technical things that we had going on.
Anytime you want me on in the future, let me know. We've only scratched the surface of things like the Twilight Zone and some of the other subjects. So anytime you want to have me on, I'd be more than happy.
You may read those words, sir.
I'll let you know.
Thank you. And for all of our listeners, I appreciate y'all so much. I apologize to y'all also for our technical issues earlier in the evening. But you know what? Hard work and perseverance got this show out. So thank y'all for your patience. And I just love all of y'all. Y'all are the reason that we do this work here. And you're so supportive. I'm so fortunate. So thank you, Arlen. Thank you, everyone. We will have Denise
I hope to see everybody Wednesday night at my webinar on the relationship between art and comic book art.
Well, I am going to be there, but I'm going to be doing the replay, sadly. I'm going to be betwixt and between. So, and again, that is myadventureclub.com to get your ticket. $10, and you're going to get to see this and see all this art. You got to go. So, thank you everybody in chat. I appreciate all your comments and questions. And you know what? I will catch you next time. I will be live Wednesday with Robin Terry. We are going to do this till we get it right. Maybe we'll get rid of these tornadoes and weird storms that keep coming through here on the show nights. But we will see you next time. And you know what? If you don't like the world you're living in, be the change. Can't do anything about this virus because you know what? It's here. It's doing its thing. But you can do stuff about you. And if you don't like how you're acting, if you don't like the environment you're in, change you. It's all great. Just manifest that stuff. You got it in you. So, again, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Same cat time, same cat channel. Good night.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.